The frozen aisle has gotten better. That's the story circulating right now, and parts of it are true. Wild-caught salmon, organic berry blends, flash frozen vegetables that hold more nutrients than the produce section can offer in February. Some corners of the Canadian freezer aisle have genuinely evolved, and shoppers are beginning to notice. But here's the part of that conversation nobody finishes. While the better end of the frozen aisle was improving, a significant portion of it didn't move at all. There are brands sitting in Canadian freezer sections right now at Walmart Canada, Real Canadian Superstore, No Frills, and Sobeys, operating on the same formulation logic they used 25 years ago: high sodium, processed protein byproducts, stabilizers and flavor systems engineered to compensate for what real ingredients should be doing, and a marketing layer polished enough to make all of it look like a reasonable weeknight dinner. The problem isn't frozen food. The problem is that certain brands built their entire market position on convenience, price, and packaging, while the product inside was never held to a standard that actually serves the person eating it. Here is a number that belongs in every Canadian kitchen. Health Canada's daily sodium recommendation for most adults is under 300 milligrams. A single serving of several popular frozen meals available across Canadian grocery stores delivers well over 1,000 milligrams. That's nearly half your entire daily allotment from one tray. Before breakfast, before your afternoon snack, and before the rest of your daily diet is counted. And that figure assumes you're eating the stated one serving. Open any of these trays and you'll see the stated serving size rarely represents what a real adult eats in one sitting. Serving size manipulation is one of the quietest consumer tactics in the Canadian grocery industry. A meal designed to feed one person is listed as 5 servings on the nutrition panel. The sodium figure on the label covers only 2/3 of what is actually in the tray. Multiply back to a realistic portion, and you are often looking at 400 to 600 milligrams of sodium from what you assumed was a reasonable shortcut. This matters in the context of how Canadians actually live. You're not calculating sodium at the end of every day. You're trying to get dinner on the table after a 45-minute commute from Brampton or Surrey or Dartmouth. You're feeding the kids before skating practice. You're heating something up at 10 p.m. because the shift ran long. The brands that built empires in this category understand exactly that reality. Some of them are exploiting it. What makes this harder to navigate in Canada specifically is the absence of front-of-pack warning labels. Unlike some countries that require high-sodium products to carry clear warnings on the front of the package, Canadian regulations don't mandate this. The nutritional information is there, on the nutrition facts panel, in small print, formatted for regulatory compliance, not consumer clarity. The familiarity factor makes it worse. These brands have been in Canadian freezer aisles for decades. Their names are automatic. You reach for them without reading the label, because you've bought them 30 times and nothing immediately terrible has happened. That's the nature of a slow, cumulative cost. 7 brands, all available right now in stores you shop at every week. And this is where the assumption starts to collapse. Let's start with the brand that shows up most reliably in the budget end of Canadian freezer aisles. Michelina's has been a fixture at No Frills, Food Basics, and Walmart Canada for decades, typically priced between $1.50 and $2 per tray. At that price point, it feels like a practical, defensible choice, something a student in a Waterloo residence, a single person on a tight grocery budget, or a parent stretching a household income can justify without much guilt. The justification falls apart when you actually read the label. A standard Michelina's pasta meal contains between 700 and 900 milligrams of sodium in a tray that is clearly meant to serve as a full meal, regardless of how the label technically portions it. The protein content is minimal relative to the caloric load, which means you'll be hungry again quickly. The ingredient list reads less like food and more like a manufacturing process: modified cornstarch, textured vegetable protein, sodium phosphates, and multiple flavor systems that exist to approximate what real ingredients would deliver. This is food engineered to be shelf-stable, cheap to produce, and palatable enough to repurchase. It is not engineered to nourish. Then there is Hungry Man, the Conagra brand that has held its position in Canadian Walmart and Superstore freezers with a single proposition: large portions at a low price. The meal is big. That is the brand's entire argument. But the sodium figures behind that argument are genuinely difficult to defend. Many Hungry Man meals available in Canada contain over 1,500 milligrams of sodium. Several cross 2,000. That is your entire recommended daily sodium intake from one meal. For anyone managing blood pressure, cardiovascular risk, or kidney function, this is not a footnote. It is the headline, being sold at eye level in the freezer section with no prominent warning. The value through volume approach is not unique to Hungry Man. It is a playbook used across the budget frozen meal category in Canada. Large packaging, large portions, enormous sodium loads, and a low price that makes the arithmetic feel like it's working in your favor. It isn't. You are paying less money for a product that costs your body significantly more. Stouffer's is the more established, more trusted version of this same problem. Stouffer's carries real brand equity in Canada. It sits a price tier above Michelin's, which implies, without ever stating, that it is a better product. The lasagna, the macaroni and cheese, the family-sized casseroles. These are comfort foods positioned for household meals, and Canadian families have extended that brand a level of trust built over decades. But Stouffer's family dishes are consistently among the highest sodium products in the frozen entree category at Canadian retailers. A single portion of Stouffer's lasagna frequently exceeds 100 milligrams of sodium. The ingredient list includes disodium inosinate and disodium guanylate, flavor enhancers that show up specifically to compensate for reduced use of actual flavorful ingredients. The more of these you find in the top half of an ingredient list, the more clearly they signal what's missing above them. The brand's warmth and familiarity, the home-style comfort positioning, the suggestion of something made with genuine care, is doing work the nutritional content cannot do on its own. If this is already changing the way you read a frozen food label, subscribe, because the next section covers the brands hiding behind health language, and that's where the problem gets harder to spot. The next part is where it gets more uncomfortable, because these brands don't present themselves as budget or indulgent. They present themselves as smart choices, health-forward options, responsible decisions for people who care about what they eat. And that gap between positioning and reality is exactly what makes them worth the closest examination. Lean cuisine has spent decades communicating to Canadian shoppers that it represents the controlled, health-conscious way to eat from the freezer aisle. The name does significant work before the package is even opened. Low-calorie counts lead the pitch, small portions, the implication of discipline and nutritional awareness. Available at Loblaws, Superstore and Metro, it occupies the aisle space that reads as a step above the budget tier, the choice that suggests you've done your research. Low-calorie is not the same as nourishing. Those are different objectives, and the gap between them is where lean cuisine operates. Many lean cuisine products in Canadian stores contain 700 to 900 milligrams of sodium per meal, in portions so small that you're consuming that sodium at a very high density per calorie. Protein levels are frequently insufficient for meaningful satiety, which means you're hungry again within 2 hours and reaching for something else, negating the caloric restraint the product was purchased to deliver. The ingredient list includes carrageenan, maltodextrin, and modified starches that reflect industrial food engineering rather than cooking. For a product aimed at people trying to make better choices, the actual nutritional delivery is significantly below what the branding implies. Marie Callender's operates in a higher price bracket with a premium comfort positioning: the pot pies, the pasta bakes, the hearty casseroles. At Real Canadian Superstore and Walmart Canada, a Marie Callender's product sits above the budget tier, and that price gap communicates quality, the way grocery store pricing always communicates quality in Canada, implicitly, powerfully, without any obligation to back it up. A Marie Callender's chicken pot pie frequently carries over 300 milligrams of sodium. The fat content accounts for a substantial portion of daily recommended intake in a single tray. These are not positioned as occasional comfort foods. They are marketed as reliable, regular family meals. That positioning makes the nutritional profile significantly more consequential than it would be for something clearly framed as an indulgence. Hot Pockets, available widely at Walmart Canada and Superstore, at least has the partial honesty of not actively claiming to be health food, but they are positioned as convenient everyday food, something handed to a teenager, packed in a work bag, or grabbed before an early shift. In that context of regular use, the 700+ milligrams of sodium per unit, the refined flour casing, and the processed meat filling represent a dietary pattern, not a single exception. What these three brands, Lean Cuisine, Marie Callender's, Hot Pockets, share is the use of packaging design and product language to manage perception. Balanced, crafted, satisfying. Lifestyle imagery calibrated to signal trustworthiness and intention. None of it is reflected in the ingredient list. The front of the package is an advertisement. The back is the disclosure. They are produced by different teams with different objectives. Only one of those teams is trying to inform you. And this is the detail most Canadian shoppers never notice. The packaging budget on a failing frozen product is often higher than the ingredient budget. The final part is the one that changes how you actually spend money. Because at some point, this comes back to the real moment. Standing in the freezer aisle at No Frills or Walmart Canada, looking at a row of options between $2 and $9, trying to make a decision that serves your budget, your schedule and your household at the same time. You're not running sodium calculations in that moment. You're reading price and reaching for the name you recognize, and every brand on this list has built its entire franchise precisely on those two variables, price familiarity and name recognition, because those are the variables that function on autopilot. Swanson is the seventh brand, and the most instructive, because Swanson invented this category. In North America, Swanson created the frozen dinner. It is the origin point of the TV tray, the microwavable meal, the cultural habit of eating reheated food in front of the television. That history is inseparable from the brand's identity. And Swanson products remain available in Canadian grocery stores today, still trading on that legacy, still presenting the same fundamental frozen dinner format that hasn't meaningfully evolved in decades. A Swanson frozen dinner can carry over 1,000 milligrams of sodium and an ingredient list approaching 30 items, the majority of which are processing agents and flavor systems rather than recognizable food. The brand's age buys it a generational trust it no longer earns through the product itself. For Canadian shoppers in their 40s and 50s who remember Swanson from their parents' kitchens, that memory operates as a quality signal it was never designed to be. So what does a smarter approach to the frozen aisle look like? It does not mean avoiding the freezer section. The best of Canadian frozen food, Highliner, PC Organics, Bonduelle, Kirkland Signature, represents real, measurable value. The freezer aisle contains genuinely good products. The answer is learning to read the difference, not walking away from the category entirely. Sodium above 800 milligrams per serving should trigger a pause, not a purchase. Ingredient lists longer than 15 items, particularly those featuring modified starches, multiple forms of sodium in the top 10, and flavor enhancers like disodium inosinate or disodium guanylate. These are signals that real ingredients have been substituted by cheaper technical alternatives. Serving size notation that lists a clearly single-person tray as 1. 5 servings is a specific strategy to compress the stated nutrient numbers. Multiply them back before you form any opinion about what you're actually consuming. Price does not signal quality in the frozen aisle. Neither does brand recognition, decades of shelf presence, or the number of times you've bought something without noticing a problem. What signals quality is a short, readable ingredient list, a reasonable sodium level, adequate protein relative to caloric content, and the absence of the flavor-enhancing additives that show up specifically because the real food isn't doing the job on its own. You started here with the assumption that the frozen brands you've recognized across a lifetime of Canadian grocery shopping are the safe, familiar choice. That assumption has served these companies far more than it has ever served you. The frozen aisle is not the problem. These specific brands and the decision to stop reading the label on something you've bought before are.